What's going on, party people? Welcome back for another episode of the Footnotes Podcast, a podcast designed to go deeper, to go a little bit further than the sermon was able to go here in our context. And so if you didn't hear that sermon yet, hit pause, head over there, listen to that sermon first, and then we'll be waiting for you right here when you finish. Those of you who might be new here to our church podcast channel or this particular series that we've been doing, the format that we do every single week is three things. Number one, something you might find interesting, something I wasn't able to necessarily get into during the sermon, but something you might find interesting, something you might want to try, and something I'm still struggling with, something I'm still wrestling with. And so without further ado, let's get into that format, shall we? So let's start with something interesting, something that you particularly might find interesting, or something you might have found quite disturbing when we got into our Bible story yesterday during worship, right? And I alluded to this, that this story here in 1 Samuel chapter 15 raises a lot of questions. Particularly, it raises a lot of moral questions, right? This Saul, the king of Israel, is sent into battle, and apparently, verse 3, God gives a very specific command that once the battle is over, Saul is supposed to enact a ban, which is just different language for you are to completely annihilate, kill all men, women, children, infants, oxen, sheep, camels, and donkeys after this battle is over. Spare no one. Spare nothing. And so I shared during my sermon, I said, listen, I can't get into this right now, but I understand. Look, dude, I get it. Like, if you're sitting here, like, that is really confusing. That's who God is. That's what God is like. That's what God at any point asked of one of, his children. And so I sort of foreshadowed that was going to be a big part of today's episode, that we're going to get into this. We're going to get into this because I think many of us have had a tricky sort of relationship with the Bible, but a tricky relationship with the Old Testament in particular. I think it would make you only human if at any point during a sermon or during a Bible study, you heard a story that caused you to go, that's a little bit misaligned with who I thought God was. Specifically, when I think about who Jesus was, like, that's a really concerning story that God would order or command that of one of his children, right? So this is I think this is a common experience that people have in church. And unfortunately, there's a lot of really bad explanations out there as to what it would possibly be the rationale for God to command something like this. So let's get very specific. In this story here in 1 Samuel chapter 15, what could the rationale possibly be for God to, let's just put it plainly, command that Saul commit genocide against citizens, people who weren't involved in the battle? Like, that just feels so at odds with who God is. And again, throughout the course of history, the church has, we talked about last week, topics that the church has historically fumbled. This is kind of another one. This is another one where the church has not really had really compelling answers as to why this was okay for God to command. And I think what I want to say about this is this. I think when it comes to the Old Testament in particular, when it comes to these passages and these stories in the Old Testament that are very confusing, very disorienting, they're very much at odds, with the person that we encounter in the person of Jesus. I think you have two options. I think you really have two options. You are either going to be a Christian that believes that God changed from the Old Testament to the New, or you are going to be a Christian who reads the Bible with an understanding that it's not God who changed, but it is our understanding of God that changed. It's our picture of God that changed. It's our clarity that we have / had or did not have at different points in our history that contributed to how we interpreted God's actions, God's voice, God's messaging, right? So the problem, and sometimes this is what I meant when I say like a lot of the explanations have been unsatisfactory. Sometimes you will go into churches and they will say, yeah, God changed, right? That was the old covenant and now we're under the new covenant. So God interacted with us in one way back then, but interacts with us in a different. It's almost I almost imagine like God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit huddling up in between the two testaments, being like, yo, we got a PR issue. Like, people are saying some, messed up stuff about us. They're saying that we're violent. They're saying that God is, hell-bent on revenge. And so let's clean it up a little bit. How about Jesus? You get in there. You get in there and give us a new image, right? Give us a new face that's a lot more merciful and compassionate and forgiving and such. You either, which I don't know about you, like I find that personally. I find that very dissatisfactory, and I find it actually also very confusing and a little bit scary that if God could go through like a personality shift, such a drastic personality shift from Old Testament to the New, what's to say that God won't do it again? What's to say that, and this is ultimately sometimes what you encounter in those churches, when they talk about the end times, they talk about a God who kind of returns back to that violent, angry past and sort of seeks revenge and vengeance on everybody. And so if you hold to that view that God changed, you run into a lot of problems. That is why it is my belief, it is my view that, and by the way, I'm not the only one. I ascribe to the Christian tradition, the group of Christians who read and interpret the Bible as a quote-unquote a slow, progressive revelation of God over the course of many, many years. Put differently, I think what you're encountering in the Bible, in the story of God, is a God who over time is slowly but surely revealing himself to us. Think of it this way. If you've been to the optometrist lately, what is the very first thing that they have you do? They have you put on those goggles, which, by the way, my dad's an optometrist. Little fun fact. And that machine is called a photometer. And what they do is they put that on and they say, okay, go look at those letters at the end of the, on the other wall, and which one is clearer, number 1 or number 2, number 2 or number 3, number 3 or number 4, right? And so, in a way, as we're moving through the Old Testament, and then especially when Jesus arrives, what's happening to our eyes, our sight, our vision of God, is we are undergoing that sort of, like a spiritual photometer, if you will, where the lenses are getting clearer and clearer and clearer. The picture of God is getting sharper and sharper and sharper. And doesn't this feel more accurate? Doesn't this feel more faithful? Now it provides really, really helpful answers to questions of, oh my gosh, what do I do with the passages in the Old Testament that say you ought to stone an adulterous woman, right? You can find that in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. What do we do with God seemingly commanding that in the Old Testament? But then Jesus, in John chapter 8, when presented with that exact opportunity, what does he do? He doesn't fulfill that law or that command. He shows mercy, he shows grace, he shows compassion. I'm thinking of the passages that say you can execute disobedient children. So if you're like, dadgum, these are in the Bible? They sure are, man. And what do we do with that when, again, compared with Jesus, who is welcoming the children? He himself. I love that story in the very beginning of the Gospels where Jesus gets lost himself. Like, his parents cannot find him for multiple days. Like, what do we do with these very contrasting pictures? Is it God who changed, or again, is it our understanding of God that changed? And I think you're kind of getting a little bit of a glimpse into the view that we hold here at this church, and also many churches that belong to our Christian tradition of interpreting Scripture in this way. It's about understanding that our faith is built on Jesus. It is not built on the Bible. The Bible informs our faith, absolutely. But it is Jesus. It is the Jesus filter, right? If Jesus is the Word, the capital W word, John chapter 1, then that means he gets the final word on what is actually of God, from God, condoned by God, and commanded by God. And so now, let's come all the way back to our example in 1 Samuel chapter 15. If the Old Testament, particularly this passage, is saying you ought to kill, murder, commit genocide against your enemies, but then Jesus comes along in one of the hallmark teachings, one of his, probably one of his most just sort of challenging teachings, is you have heard it said, eye for an eye. You have heard it said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But what I say to you, what I command of you, is to love your enemy, right? It's one of the most controversial teachings of Jesus, and yet it brings into crystal clarity who Jesus is, and I dare to say who Jesus has always been, who God has always been. We just didn't necessarily have the lens. We didn't have the vision. We didn't have the clarity back in 1 Samuel many, many years ago, right? Many, many years before Jesus showed up. We didn't have Jesus yet. We didn't have that clarity yet. And so often, I never want to speak ill of the authors of the Old Testament. I think they were doing the best they could with what they had. And what they did not yet have was access to Jesus, his teaching, his wisdom, his brilliance. And so I offer that to you as a tool that as you, that's something you might find really interesting, right? Especially as you try to navigate and you try to reconcile other troubling passages, particularly in the Old Testament. So something interesting. Okay, something you might want to try. This is a multi-pack. You're gonna get a 4-pack in this one. If you were in worship yesterday, or if you worshiped online, you know that where we concluded our time is we made available these sort of spiritual prescriptions. You remember getting a prescription card, an RX card, which says here's your, this is what you've got as far as an illness goes, and here's the medicine you ought to take. So we made available some spiritual prescription cards to counteract, to combat the lies that really take root in our lives, and thus cause us to fall into dishonesty and deceit. That was the whole crux of the conversation yesterday. And so you'll recall the 4 main lies that we discussed that take hold of our hearts and our minds and our spirits so often are these. Number 1, God won't provide. Number 2, God won't understand. Number 3, God won't forgive. And number 4 is God is withholding something from me. God is keeping something from me. And so I'm going to work through these one by one because I gave 3 practical exercises, 3 practical activities that you could perform and participate in to sort of counteract those lies. I'm going to give you one more bonus one. I'm going to give you one more bonus activity, one more bonus counter activity that you can take with you for each of these lies. So let's say you are tuning into this, or let's say you were in worship yesterday, and the lie that God won't provide, that's been the one that's been sort of had a stranglehold on your life, and it's caused you to too often take control of your own life, not trust, not depend upon God, certainly not depend or trust other people. You look out for yourself, right? I gave a number of exercises and activities I think you ought to consider. Another one is one that I'm super bad at. I'm super bad at, which is another way to counteract this. Another way to counteract this is to not just believe that God provides, directly, but also to re-believe, recommit to that belief that God provides in and through our neighbor, in and through the people that God has surrounded us with. And so one activity you might consider is asking someone for help instead of trying to find the solution on your own. Some of you right now, you've got, or this week, you will have a need, something you need, an answer you need to find, a solution you need to discover to a problem or to a need you have in your life. And one thing you might ought to consider is instead of solving that on your own, instead of meeting that need on your own, even if you can, I want to challenge you, I want to push you, even if you can meet that need on your own, ask someone for help. Get more seasoned and more practiced on the Christian value of living in community. This is the church. The church is at the core, it's a belief. I cannot do this on my own, and I can't provide everything for myself on my own. It's like so counter-American. It's very, very anti-American, right? Figure this out on your own. Pull yourself up. Figure it out. Do it. Solve it. For us as Christians, that was never in our DNA. And so I want to encourage you, one counter activity is to ask someone for help for something that you could figure out the answer, you could solve it, you could meet that need on your own, but ask someone for help to rely on someone else's provision. I'm going to do this. I'm going to take my own medicine, right? I went to a conference with some of my pastor colleagues last week, and I learned of some pastors who are doing things at their churches far better than I am. They're so much further along than I am. And instead of just stumbling along and trying to figure out the answer, figure out how to improve by myself, I'm going to exercise some humility, and I'm going to exercise some reliance on my neighbor. I'm going to take him out for coffee. I'm going to take him out for lunch. I'm going to say, hey, teach me this. Show me how to do this. Provide for me what I can't find on my own. So there's another counteractivity for that one. Another counteractivity for the second lie. Again, second lie was God doesn't understand. God won't understand. Again, maybe as I was preaching yesterday or as you were listening to that sermon back, you're like, that's the one for me, dude. And I'm like, I feel like no one has ever understood me. No one has ever understood my life or my challenges or my limitations, my struggles, my doubts. And maybe you have good reason to believe that, right? People demonstrate, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, like how in my own life I had people who demonstrated a lack of understanding or an unwillingness to understand me, and then I projected that on other people, and I have absolutely projected this on God. And so maybe that's you. Maybe you're stuck in that lie. And I don't know. I'm going to give you a couple quick things. Number one, I was just thinking about this as I got onto this podcast. One of my favorite worship artists is a guy by the name of Will Regan. Will Regan, but he belonged to another worship band called United Pursuit. And he did a song called Through and Through. So if you're a big music person, a big worship music person, I would really encourage you to download that song or, good Lord, what am I? This is 1999. We don't download music anymore. Stream that song on Spotify, Pandora, I don't know where you get your music, Apple Music. Through and Through. Through and Through. I love this song. I'm going to click over the lyrics real fast. I find that I'm safe and warm in your loving arms. I find that I'm safe and warm in your loving arms. You see me. You know me. You love me through and through. It's like the reoccurring refrain. It's very repetitive. In those moments where I felt very isolated or rejected or alone, that song has brought me a lot of comfort. So Through and Through, I would encourage that as a good song to meditate and reflect upon. Another one is one of the tips or activities that I gave on the prescription card was like find someone who's been through what you've been through and take them out to lunch, take them out to coffee. I think I just want to go a step further and just say like, if you don't know somebody, right, that's probably one of the biggest struggles. Like some people are like, I mean, that would be great if I knew someone trustworthy and someone safe who's been through what I've been through that I can, obtain some solidarity with. but I don't know that person. I don't have access to anyone like that in my life. Can I give you a really practical suggestion? Ask your pastor. Ask your pastor, or ask the most extroverted person in your life. What am I talking about? Essentially, I guess what I'm just trying to say is like one of the incredible resources that I think pastors and churches have is information. It is information. And over coffee meetings, in the quietness of the sanctuary, over email, many life experiences are shared with me. They're shared with Pastor Katie, our care team here at the Peak. And we never divulge that information without your permission. However, there have been numerous times where someone has reached out to me and said, "Hey, this happened to me 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, someone said, 'Hey, we are going through surrogacy. That's the path we are taking to pregnancy and to starting our family. I don't know if you know anybody, Kyle, but man, it's just such an isolating journey. There's not a lot of people who know or understand what that's like. And so if you know of anybody, let us know.'" And so my practice is always, I will always ask the other person's permission. I'll say, "Hey, listen, I'm not going to divulge their information either, but there's another person in our church who is struggling with X. They are working through Y. I've not given them your information, but if you're open to it, I would like to give them your information and connect you guys so that you might be able to have a conversation," right? This was several months ago. Several months ago, we had a couple of couples whose adult children were getting a divorce. And they're like, "Dang, there's like no playbook for this. How do I support my son? How do I support my daughter who's going through a divorce? I don't even know how to do that." And so one of the things that we did was, again, I sort of brokered those conversations and those connections. And so I would just say, utilize your pastor, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Utilize your pastor, or let's say you've got a friend who's just crazy connected. Utilize them if you can't think of someone right off the bat. Okay, I need to move a little quicker. God won't forgive. Let's say that's the lie you have fallen victim to. God won't forgive. God won't show me mercy. God won't show me compassion. Sure, God will forgive people of their stuff, but dude, my stuff, nah. Too dark, too sinful, too whatever. I'm not doing that. Ultimately, a lot of the practical suggestions that I gave on that card were all about just getting more acquainted with grace and how this whole grace thing works. What is grace? Grace is the unmerited, it is the undeserved love and affection of God. And many of us are still very, very uncomfortable with that concept. I love when it's, tit for tat. I love when it's earned and received. It's black and white, right? I mean, I also hate that, right? I also hate that terrifies me that sometimes we operate that way with one another. Certainly, as one of those like love-hate things, I think for us as human beings, we understand formula, we understand equations. If you do X, then that results in Y. We understand that. We like it when it works in our favor, and we hate it when it lands us on the end of, an outcome, a consequence that is really, really painful. And so one more suggestion, just to get more comfortable with grace, is this week, I want to challenge you. If someone gives you a gift, here's the rule. A, you're not allowed to apologize for not having thought of giving them a gift as well. And number two, you're not allowed to get even. You're not allowed to pay them back. You're not allowed to look the rest of the week for an opportunity to get back on equal terms. For some of you, are like, what? Why? What does this have to do with forgiveness? It has everything to do with this concept of grace and getting and finding more and more opportunities to be comfortable with it. All right, and then lastly, God is withholding something from me. God is keeping something from me. If that is the lie that you've been holding on to, that's the lie that's really been controlling and domineering a lot of your thought and your spirit. One other thing you might try is you might take a pen and paper, or if you're an artist, you can draw this, or whatever medium is most applicable for you. What I want you to do is, if there's a really, really strong desire you have for something, I really am a firm believer that so long as those desires are aligned with the heart and the character of God, I'm a big believer that those desires came from God. If they're aligned with God, if there's something that God would want for you, that's a key marker, then I believe those desires are put there by God. And so what I would say is, when you are sitting there like, oh, God's withholding this thing from me, this job, or having kids, or meeting someone, a partner, romantically, I'm just rattling off several examples. If you believe, like if that is a desire that God has put on your heart, cling. Here's something you might want to try with a pen and paper, draw it, or just do it in your own prayer life. Figure out a way to cling to the promise God has made to you, but hold loose to the packaging. Okay, so a little play on words, right? So cling, white knuckle the promise that God has given to you, the desire that is in your heart, that has come from God. It is obviously something God would want for all of God's children. Cling to the promise, hold loose to the packaging. What do I mean by that? I mean, so often when there's something we think God is withholding or keeping from us, we have a very, very specific picture of what it's going to look like, when it's going to happen, who it's going to involve, where we're going to be. And at least in my life, all of the promises that God has made to me, they've come true. None of them have come true in the way in which I previously thought or originally thought. That goes for my marriage. That goes for me having kids. That goes for even this church that I am pastoring right now. I did not know when I was called to ministry in Colorado, eventually, that I would be pastoring over here in North Carolina. And so that is one more thing you might want to try. How can you cling to the promise, hold loose to the packaging? Okay. And then lastly, okay, we are finishing up. Something interesting, something you want to try. And then lastly, something I'm still struggling with. Okay. As I was working through all of the lies that, I think Saul could have been, working through and fighting through, one that emerged for me, it's not necessarily in the story so much, but it's been a reoccurring voice that I have been struggling and fighting against for a really, really long time. Which is, so it's a little bit longer, but it's, Jesus can't be trusted, or Jesus, you should be weary or leery of following Jesus, because he's going to take all your stuff away. He's going to make your life miserable. Jesus is going to make your life painful and really, really hard, right? Now, we're not going to spend time unpacking where this voice came from, because in many ways it came from a lot of different places, and it would probably take a full hour-long therapy session to psychoanalyze me and why that particular lie has taken root. But I think what would be helpful is if you are someone who maybe you are early in your faith, and this has been a lie that's kind of snuck in. It's like, oh, are you sure you want to follow Jesus? Like, isn't it really costly? Isn't it going to require a lot of you? Or let's say you were someone who's listening to this and you've reached kind of like a deeper level of faith. I always like to say that when you are moving through your faith journey, all of the main characters in scripture, they go through kind of like a second conversion where they really start going deeper, and God starts asking more of them. Maybe you're in that season of your faith right now where you're not a beginner, a baby Christian anymore, and God's starting to give you more responsibility. God's starting to ask more of you. God's challenging you more than God was in the beginning of your relationship. Sometimes this voice can sneak in. It's like, ooh, I don't know, man. Like, are you sure you want to do that? You sure you want to follow? You sure you want to take his hand? Like, what if it's super painful? What if it's super costly? What if it robs you of comforts and things that you enjoy? What if your life just becomes miserable when you follow Jesus? So this voice, this lie has snuck into my life, and it is one that I have struggled with for many, many years now. And here's why I struggle with it. I struggle with it because there is an element of truth in it, right? Right? Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me. Jesus says things like, those who keep their lives will lose them. Those who lose their lives for my sake will find them. Jesus has, throughout the course of his preaching, this reoccurring theme of the need for sacrifice, the need for submission, the need for obedience, the need to count the cost and to not be afraid to lose things along the way. So there is an element of truth to this. But if you are someone for whom this lie is preventing you from actually following Jesus, maybe you're curious and it's been this voice that stopped you, or maybe again you are someone who's deeper in your faith and this has been the thing that's prevented you from going further, being more and more sold out and committed to the gospel and the kingdom of God. What I would say to you is, while there is a tinge of truth in there, where this is definitely a lie, is where that voice that says, ooh, God's gonna take things away from you. God's gonna make your life miserable if you decide to follow him and you practice obedience to him. Where it's a lie is, for me, so often the picture I have of God in my mind that's talking that way to me, that's speaking that way to me, is this power-hungry, egomaniac, theocratic sort of king that is just like, do what I say and don't ask any questions. And what I have to do time and time again is remind myself that is not the king that we have in Jesus. That is not the Lord we have in Jesus. One who demonstrates relentless humility, patience. One who never asks anything hard of me that he himself didn't do first, right? Jesus can say, take up your cross. Jesus can say, you got to lose your life if you want to find it, because God in Jesus did it first. And so that is one thing that's been helping me as I've been doing this struggle, this wrestling with this lie. And the other thing I would say to you is this. The last thing I'll say to you is this. Another thing that I have found is that when, inevitably, my discipleship, my relationship with God has cost me something, when I look back on my own life, so far, everything that it has cost me pales in comparison to what I have gained. And Paul talks about this, right? The Apostle Paul in the New Testament talks about this. He says, I count it all as a loss. Like, I count it all as garbage, as rubbish, when compared with the glorious riches that I have found in Christ Jesus. And so I say that to you as well, as like, in the midst of the struggling, that there is some validity to it. There is still some it's still a fear of mine. Like, there's still privileges and things that I cling to that I'm afraid to let go of. And I got to work through that. I still got to wrestle through that. I still got to struggle with that. I enjoy material things. Like, I'm sure we all have some sort of material stuff in our lives, comforts and conveniences that we really enjoy. Like, I really enjoy my car. I really enjoy, I got a new car about 4 years ago, and I love it. And I want to keep it. But if Jesus asked it, and I sometimes I do this like weird thing, like, if Jesus asked it of me, could I give it up? And it is a live struggle with me. I'm just being really vulnerable. It's a live struggle with me with some of the things in my life to consider the things that would cost me to be faithful to Jesus. But ultimately, the thing that has been winning out and the thing that I hope continues to win out is this reminder that everything that I have ever lost, everything that following Jesus has ever cost me, again, it's paled in comparison to what I've gained. And furthermore, that's that's a very selfish way of looking at it. What I've also found is that every time, I don't know, let's say we're talking about matters of justice, right? Whenever God has required me to step into a difficult conversation on, I don't know, oppression, injustice, poverty, racism. We can name several of them. It has cost me something. But what it has cost me, actually, what I gained, it wasn't even for what I could gain. It was for my neighbor could gain, what the world could gain from me being brave enough, courageous enough, faithful enough to step into a hard conversation and to advocate for a more just world, a more compassionate world, a more kingdom-looking world than the one that we're presently, roaming around and wandering around in right now. And so that's another thing that I would just say, that if this lie has really gotten a hold of you, what that lie is also not telling you is that what following Jesus may cost you is also for the sake of loving our neighbor. It's not only for our good, but it's for the good of our neighbor. It's for the good of the world. And so this will continue to be a struggle of mine. This will continue to be something I wrestle with. Again, I've got several things in my life, conveniences, comforts, even privileges that I have enjoyed. But a live question I have all the time is, when it comes to these things I possess, something I have to wrestle with all the time is, do I possess them or do they possess me, right? Do I possess them? Am I holding them or do they have a hold on me? And so that's something I'm still wrestling with, something I'm still struggling with. And so I went a little bit longer today. So we're going to end it there. We're going to cap it there. But thank you again, friends, for being here. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. If you are finding this helpful, if you're finding these conversations useful to you and your faith, let us know. Shoot us a message. Let us know. We want to create content. We want to create stuff that is helpful to you and improving and deepening your faith. Share this. Share it with friends. If you feel like you had a conversation with a friend or a coworker or a family member recently who's like, oh, dang, they would really benefit from this. We just want people to hear some of the stuff that we've found along the way. All of this manna that, to quote an Old Testament term, that we've received, that God has handed to us, we want to share with others. And so I hope that was the case today. And so again, friends, thank you so much for being here. We will see you on the next one.